So, imagine an organization that intelligence agencies are currently monitoring for right-wing extremism. But then you trace its roots back over 2 centuries, and you find out they started as egalitarian champions of liberty, literally fighting on the barricades for united and democratic Germany. Sounds kind of impossible, right? Well, it's a massive historical paradox. And today, we're going to unpack exactly how that stunning transformation happened and what it all means for modern politics. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into the complex history, the really unique culture, and the highly controversial modern reality of German student fraternities, collectively known as Verbindungen. We'll be looking directly at the historical record to understand how these groups have profoundly shaped, and in turn been shaped by, the turbulent course of German history over the last 200 years. It is a story packed with idealism, dark turns, and some incredibly enduring traditions. Okay, let's take a quick look at our roadmap. We'll start with origins, honor, freedom, fatherland. Then we'll track the shift to nationalism, explore modern revival and controversies, contrast the Korps versus the Burschenschaft, and finally, demystify the Menzer fencing tradition. Part 1. Origins, honor, freedom, fatherland. Let's wind the clock back to the early 19th century. After the Napoleonic Wars, Germany wasn't a single country yet. It was just a fragmented collection of 39 loosely allied states. And the youth back then were deeply frustrated. They just bled on the battlefield to free their lands from Napoleon, really hoping to build a unified German nation in return. But instead, the Congress of Vienna just handed power right back to the traditional kings and princes. So, in 1815, at the University of Jena, 143 students decided to take matters into their own hands. They founded the first Burschenschaft, a pan-German fraternity designed to tear down those regional borders. And the idea spread like wildfire. Just 2 years later, in 1817, they organized the massive Wartburg Festival. Imagine hundreds of passionate students gathering at a historic castle, advocating for unity, and literally throwing symbols of conservative rule, like corporals' canes, straight into a blazing bonfire. Of course, this terrified the ruling monarchs, who quickly shut them down with the strict Carlsbad decrees in 1819. But the students, they didn't give up. They operated in secret for decades, eventually emerging to lead the famous March Revolution of 1848, fighting for a constitutional democracy. Their founding motto was Ehre, Freiheit, Fatherland, honor, freedom, fatherland. Now I know, to our modern ears, that might sound pretty conservative, maybe even reactionary, but you've got to remember the context here. Back in 1815, this was a radical, liberal battle cry. It was a bold push for individual civil liberties and an egalitarian society, standing directly against the absolute rule of hereditary kings. These students were absolutely the progressive vanguard of their time. Moving on to part 2, the shift to nationalism. As we move into the late 19th century, right after Germany actually unified in 1871 under Otto von Bismarck, the ideology of the Burschenschaften went through a drastic and honestly a very dark transformation. Once their big dream of a unified German empire was finally a reality, those early egalitarian values just started to vanish. They were completely overshadowed by an aggressive, exclusionary brand of nationalism known as folkish ideology. This was a massive pivot. They moved away from civic liberty, where anyone sharing democratic values could belong, to a strict blood and soil focus on ethnic purity. By the 1890s, this was entirely formalized. In 1896, their umbrella organization actually passed a resolution officially excluding Jewish students from membership, using pseudoscientific racial theories to justify it. Their path for the 20th century was deeply tied to this radical nationalism, and it led to this fascinating but tragic historical irony. When World War I broke out in 1914, members eagerly enlisted in massive numbers. After Germany's devastating defeat, they fiercely opposed the new democratic Weimar Republic in 1919, seeing it as totally illegitimate. So when the Nazi regime took power in 1933, many Burschenschaften actually welcomed them, thinking they shared this vision of a strong ethnic German state. But here's the profound irony. Totalitarian dictatorships do not tolerate independent clubs of any kind. Despite their initial alignment, by 1935, facing immense pressure to merge into the state's Nazi student apparatus, the fraternities were forced into self-dissolution. The very regime they thought would champion their ideals ultimately destroyed their independence. All right, part 3, modern revival and controversies. After World War II, these fraternities were initially banned by the Allies, but they eventually revived in West Germany. And they brought all of that complex historical baggage right into the modern era. Today, that baggage has very real political consequences.
As of 2024, there are over 50 parliamentarians in the right-leaning Alternative for Germany, or AfD, party who have documented ties to Burschenschaften. This heavy overlap has drawn intense public scrutiny. And this is exactly why this topic matters for us today. We aren't just talking about dusty 19th century history here. These organizations sit right at the center of modern European political debate.
Because of these political ties and continuing ideological controversies, state-level domestic intelligence agencies in Germany, the Verfassungsschutz, have actually placed specific Burschenschaft chapters under official surveillance. Authorities have cited anti-constitutional activities, ethno-nationalist ideologies, and ties to known extremist networks. But it's really crucial to note that the intelligence community doesn't just issue a blanket ban on all student groups. They treat the landscape as highly heterogeneous, carefully monitoring only specific individual chapters that display verifiable extremist indicators. This external pressure from intelligence agencies, mixed with intense internal debate over ethnic membership criteria, actually fractured the movement entirely. In 2016, a massive schism happened, and this wasn't just a minor disagreement. It was a fundamental breaking point. Liberal-leaning chapters, completely fed up with the lingering tolerance of ethno-cultural elements within their ranks, formally seceded from the traditional umbrella group, the Deutsche Burschenschaft. They established their own new organization, the Allgemeine Deutsche Burschenschaft, explicitly to foster a democratic orientation that firmly rejects any racial or ethnic prerequisites for membership. It really was a fight for the soul of a centuries-old movement.
Okay, part 4. Corps versus Burschenschaften.
Now here's something really important that often gets lost in the sensational headlines. Not all German student fraternities are Burschenschaften. To truly understand this landscape, we have to look at another major, historically significant group, the Corps. While Burschenschaften were founded to be overtly political and nationalist, the Corps, which are actually the oldest type of student fraternity in Central Europe, emphasize strict political neutrality and cosmopolitan tolerance. They actively distance themselves from ethnic or nationalist questions. In fact, to show just how open they can be, the source material points out an amazing anecdote. In 2011, a prominent Corps Alumni Association awarded one of their most prestigious academic medals to an Egyptian doctoral student in engineering. The Corps based their selection entirely on personal talent, dedication, and character, proudly admitting members regardless of their national origin, race, or religion.
Finally, part 5, the Menser fencing traditions.
Whether a fraternity is a politically active Burschenschaft or a politically neutral corps, we really need to demystify their most famous and definitely most misunderstood ritual, the Mensur. The Mensur shocks a lot of people when they first hear about it. It's a strictly regulated academic fencing bout using genuinely sharp sabers. But listen to this. It is not a sport, and it is absolutely not a duel to settle an insult or a grudge. There is no winner, and there's no loser. The combatants stand in a fixed, rigid stance, and the entire psychological goal is simply this: do not flinch. It's a ritual designed purely to test personal courage, stoicism, and discipline under extreme stress. Because facial protection is intentionally minimal, visible facial scars, called Schmisse, often happen. And instead of hiding them, these scars are proudly accepted as lifelong badges of honor and unyielding resilience.
Because of how intense this tradition is, fraternities are categorized by their stance on the Festfrage, or the fencing question. It generally works in 3 steps. First, you have Pflichtschlagend, meaning mandatory striking. You literally have to participate in a minimum number of bouts to become a full member. Second, facultative Schlagend, or optional striking. Here, the student gets to choose for themselves whether they want to fence or not. And finally, Nichtschlagend, meaning non-striking. Many fraternities, especially Catholic ones, completely reject the practice of fencing and focus on other traditions entirely. So, as we wrap with this explainer, we've seen an incredibly turbulent journey. From radical liberals fighting kings for a unified state, to Völkisch nationalists caught in the grip of history, all the way to a deeply fractured modern landscape made up of politically neutral corps and highly scrutinized Burschenschaften. It leaves us with a truly provocative thought. Can organizations deeply rooted in centuries-old honor rituals and scarred by periods of radical nationalism truly adapt to find a legitimate, constructive place in today's highly diverse society? Or are they destined to remain controversial relics of a bygone past? It's a massive question that Germany continues to debate to this day. Thanks for exploring this fascinating history with me on this explainer. Until next time.